When you first get your 3-9 optic, it's going to come in a box just like this. It advertises that it's shockproof, waterproof, ultra slim tunnel vision, big eye box, nitrogen purged, and fully multi-coated lenses with a warranty. Let's go ahead and pop it open. This, you can see MS 3-9x40. It does show you the reticle that you're going to be getting with this one, which I'm a fan of. I'm really happy to see that they put in a functional reticle. So inside the box, going to be a couple important things here, such as your specs card, which I'm going to fish out. So here's your specs card, and on your specs card, it's going to have the information. It's going to tell you what kind of rings you can put it on, what kind of rail you can put it on, what you should expect for performance from the optic. For example, total elevation available is 70 MOA, so it just tells me that I can't put it on a 55 MOA rail or something like that, but I could still throw it on my 20 MOA rail and have no issues with that one. This will work fine for me. It also tells you about the corrections, tube diameter, those kind of things. If you're asking questions and you're new to optics, this is probably going to answer a lot of them for you. Then you have rings. And so Discovery has recently started making more and more types of rings, and I'm going to be trying out more on my channel soon. But this is a first look at these, which are going to go with the 3-9 optic. They are Allen's, and they do have on the side, they do have something where you could either put your Allen key through here and kind of crank on it, or you could actually use a proper wrench. And I always recommend a wrench, and don't over torque your rings. Don't over torque the Allens as well, because it'll crunch your image on your scope in the tube. It's insulated pretty well. There's a lot in here. So inside of the scope, so far I have my scope lens cleaning cloth, and also the manual, which is going to tell you some of the instructions if you're not familiar with how to zero optics and things like that. They usually do a great job, and this one does have more information about the warranty, being free of defects, and you're going to want to fill out this warranty form page right here that'll give you more information on that. All right, so here's the optic. Optic has a couple unique features about it. First of all, it has a leveling position. So there is a flat spot on this scope right here so that you can put a level on top of it. You could just go ahead and throw any old level on there, and as long as your rifle is level and the rail is level and your rings are not all goofy, you put that on here and you'll be able to level this instead of putting on the turret cap, because turret caps are inconsistent and they're not technically a good leveling place. But this, as long as the reticle has been placed properly in the scope, then this is going to be consistent, and it's going to help you keep your reticle level, and that way any holdovers or corrections or anything that you would do, it'll keep it consistent for your actual reticle. I still throw a bubble level on all my scopes. Even after mounting it level properly, I still throw a bubble level on, or I have rails that have them as well, just so I don't have degrees and angles of error. So this optic has a couple unique things. Let's start off with the fast focus here. So it has a cap that actually goes on top like that, and take it off, don't lose it, put it in your pocket. There's your fast focus, which moves pretty freely, has a pretty good range of travel for correcting with your diopter, getting the reticle sharp for your eye. Then you're going to see that the magnification reveal right here is actually revealed in this pocket right here. So this moves pretty smoothly. I'm going to say the ring itself is pretty smooth, and it's going to reveal on the top side what power you're on. So that's your indicator right there, that little cutaway. Yeah, pretty smooth. Doesn't feel sloppy, and it does appear to have, kind of a cattail or an assist on the top there, which is easy to grab onto and move it back and forth. A little something extra, but it does seem to be firm on there in a good way, not in a bad way, not overly firm, just appropriately firm, especially with something that needs to be shockproof. You don't want it to be overly tight or overly loose. There is a happy medium to find with that, because if it's way too tight, sometimes parts will almost shatter or break. And if it's way too loose and sloppy, then things slop around. And so you actually kind of need a happy medium there with certain internals. And you need things really tight when it comes to being reverse recoil rated for air guns, things of that nature, you definitely need to have the glass reinforced on both sides, and that needs to be tight and done well. Okay, taking off the turret cap, I'll start with the top one. This is your elevation, and this is a disc that is not resettable to 0, and that shouldn't concern you at all because these are not the kind of turrets that you would really care to take off and dial and do all that unless you're just zeroing at 100 yards. And that's why these are in the corrections that they are. If I can show you here, so you have a 0 number up there, and I'm just going to turn that around to be towards me. And then you have your indicators here. One thing you might find interesting is it says that 1 click equals quarter MOA. But there are 5, basically 5, count this out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's kind of set up like 10th mil indicators in clicks, but it says each click is a quarter of an inch at 100 yards, or 1/4 MOA. So I'm going to say it doesn't really matter, whatever it ends up being, because a scope like this, I'm not going to take the turret caps off anyways, unless I am just zeroing the optic altogether. And in that case, I'm going to just go back to the reticle once it's zeroed and use this for holdovers. That's the way it's designed, and that's the way that it makes the most sense to use it. Now taking a look here, let's get a look at the eye box. It looks like it has some different kinds of drop values in here that I'm not 100% familiar with. There are hashes with indicators at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12, but then there are actually hashes that go beyond that, and I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go study the reticle to see what the extended features are there, but you can't see anything too far beyond there. It's probably not something you're going to use beyond the number 12 anyways with a scope like this. Eye box seems to be pretty okay. Not bad. I'm going to move it up to 9 power here. Yeah, it's not too bad. Now, the parallax being set probably around 100 yards with an optic like this, it is just not going to be clear at closer distances. So when I'm looking across the yard here at 25 yards, if I'm on a higher power, it's not going to be clear. And so let's just open that cap again. It's almost usable, but not clear. If I go down to 3 power, it reduces some of that parallax error, and it does seem to clear up the image for me a little bit and makes it more usable. Cap cover seems to click well enough. It's pretty firm. Let's mount it up on something and try it out. As you can see, I have my Discovery MS 3-9x40 mounted up here on top of my Weihrau HW97 in 177. This is a phenomenal rifle. It shoots under dime size at 25 yards. I mean, it really shoots one whole groups at 25 yards, which is where I just adjusted my zero. I had done a further zero before. It wasn't real practical because the parallax is set right around 100 yards with this optic. I had originally done a 100-yard zero just to see what that was like. It was a little too far, actually, for the speeds of this to be zeroed for that. So instead what I did is I backed off my magnification down to 5 power. That allowed me to see a target at 25 yards relatively clearly. And this being a second focal plane, that will provide some things I need to think about as I shoot further. I'll have a slight different point of impact when I go up to 9 power now at different distances, not just because of my drop value, but also because I'm on a different power. It's a second focal plane. Head position matters, all that kind of stuff is still going to be relevant and true, but it shouldn't be terribly far off. And if I'm just plinking steel like what I'm going to do in a second, then it's a non-issue. But on 5 power, I actually found I can get away with that pretty well. I can still see my targets here at 75, 80 yards relatively well. I can still shoot a 1-inch spinner with my data. So I know if I leave it on 5 power, I can shoot very, very close and a little bit further, which is just fine for a rifle like this. If I need to zoom in and do identification of a squirrel or find out where the gopher is at some distance, I can still go up to 9 power. And if I'm around 75 to 100 yards, the image is clear enough because of that fixed parallax setting. But if I feel like it's going to be coming closer, and hopefully it does, and I need to take a shot, then I'm going to move it down to 5 power, and my data is going to line up a lot better, reticle placement and all that. It's going to make a lot more sense. Again, you're dealing with a second focal plane, not a first focal plane, and no side parallax. The benefit of this optic is the glass is actually pretty clear. I am impressed. I didn't know exactly what I would be looking into, because typically when optics are configured like this or on this price point, there's some limitations, and it's just built into the product because it's more of a workhorse optic and not as much a player competition optic. This reticle has been functional. I had to look at it for a little bit just to make sure I knew exactly what was going on, and I think I have a good idea of what's going on there. I think it's functional, works well, my data's lining up. It is thick enough that it's easy for me to see, and it's thin enough that when I put it on like a striped gopher, which I'm going to kill in a little bit here, when I put it on a striped gopher, it's contrasting nicely and not covering up too much of the image. I can put it right on the eyeball and go for it, and hopefully I can show you some footage here in a little bit. I don't know if I have to blur it out or how YouTube's going to handle that, but I'm pretty happy with the image I'm getting at about 25 yards. If I go any closer than 25 yards, I'm going to drop it down to 3 power and just deal with the differences in point of impact versus point of aim. I am happy with that image. The eye box has been pretty good. So now I'm about 50 rounds or so since my 0. So let's just say that day, let's say I'm 100 rounds in. If this was not shockproof, I would probably know by now. I'm going to keep shooting it, and I'll probably get several hundred rounds in on a nitro piston or a Springer like this. This is a true Springer, so there is some reverse recoil that is considerable for the optic to go through. I'm going to keep looking at it. As the sun goes down here, I have probably another 35 minutes, I would say, of sunlight. And I want to figure out, how much light collection can this provide with the 40 millimeter. I'm pretty happy with what I see so far, and the sun is not directly on everything. I'm shooting into a shadow, which is usually a good testament of the quality of glass. And like I said, I'm actually pretty happy with the glass quality, the reticle, and the shock proofness as advertised. Sure, by the time I post this, it is going to be pretty much summer, late spring. I have been shooting it consistently on 5 power. That's been my experience, is that if I leave it on 5 power and don't move it around, the parallax issue isn't too bad. I don't have as many issues where, my point of impact would change. If I went up to 9 power, I would have those issues. And 9 power is usable at 100 yards and a little bit closer, but 5 power is usable very, very close. I've taken some squirrels now really close, and then it's still usable out to, believe it or not, I've been plinking a little bit at 200 yards with extreme holdover. I've been using a hold point there. Normally I dial, and if you watch my channel, I dial for almost everything. But for this particular reticle, it wouldn't have enough because I need 27.5 mils. So I just found a hold point, used it, measured it, and I've been clanging on a 10-inch steel down there. If you haven't watched my channel with Springers, and that's hard for you to believe at 200 yards, then go watch the impacts that I make on pop cans and stuff at 200. Normally I would dial. I have been using the RWS 8.64s. Pretty windy today, but this thing still hammers out some tight groups. And I guess that's kind of the whole point of it. If somebody's going to be purchasing an optic like this, and more than likely I would recommend it towards a deer rifle or a hunting application. But if you wanted to do dual purpose with it, I feel like you could still use this on a Springer and use it at lower powers, not at higher powers, and the image will be clear enough for you. It's not going to be quite as clear as something with an adjustable objective, but a lot of times what you're looking for is something that's just shockproof and is going to last in the first place. My groups down there are dang near as tight as they usually are when I use a much bigger optic with an adjustable parallax or adjustable objective or something like that. They're pretty close to as good, and I'm shooting in great lighting, and I've got a lot of rounds downrange with this rifle, so I'm practiced. But I think most people who are competent with optics in rifles and understanding the reticle features, you're going to be just fine doing what I'm doing here and still shooting relatively close or far. So is it brake barrel rated? Is it Springer rated? I would say absolutely. The rings have held up. They have not moved. They have not cracked. I haven't had any issues with that. The scope and the reticle have stayed put, which is the biggest thing. Nothing's come loose on any of these. I've been testing them out to make sure nothing is coming loose. And it comes with a couple extras. You know, it comes with the scope cap covers, comes with a reticle that's decent and usable. I can't say the same for a lot of optics out there right now that are advertised towards air guns. Many of them are not usable, and a lot of them are really frustrating, or they have reticles that don't make any sense, or they have glass that's so poor that it doesn't even matter that you have an extended reticle in it, because in some of those poorer companies and poor quality optics with poor quality glass, you get down to the holdover points and the glass is so poor you just can't see. It's not functional, or the distortion is so bad that it's actually not where you think it is. This one, I actually can hold to that 14 line, and so there's 12, 13, 14 mils, 15, let's go a little further, and even beyond the 15th mil, going down into the portion where there's just boxes. Now there's no numerical indicators there, and it's not really ideal to use, especially being a second focal plane. But you could, it looks like you could use those next indicators because the glass is clear enough. It holds the reticle just fine, and the distortion at the very edge of the glass is the only thing you would have to worry about. It looks like I can come pretty close to the edge of the glass and it's still clear. And I'm telling you guys, for the price of an optic like this is a really good deer hunting scope. I would be super happy with this. If you're taking shots with a serious caliber and you know your holdovers, and you're not worried about dialing, which in a hunting scenario most of the time you're not, I would say I'd be comfortable with this out to a few hundred yards as a minimum. It's definitely enough power and the features are there. Beyond that, I typically prefer to dial just for exactness. I'm going to range whatever it is and try to make it a really, really good, precise shot. But a few hundred yards with a serious caliber, this should do you just fine, as well as with these air guns. I've been going back and forth between hot weather and cold weather. And another thing I noticed is not only is it shock proof, but now I know that it's waterproof and fog proof firsthand. That's a pretty tight group. I've got a 1/4 inch dot down there, and it's about twice that at 30 yards. Not too bad. I think I shoot a little tighter with other optics, but not too much tighter. And those are very specific optics to air guns with adjustable objectives. Again, clear up the image, and I'm usually dialing, and I'm not shooting in 20-mile-an-hour winds like I've had gusts today in about 20s. As far as image quality goes, let's talk a little bit more about image. So one thing that a person that has looked through a few more optics might be curious about is color rendition, contrast, brightness. Right now it's pretty bright, and so I'm not using this as my only evaluation. I'm using the last few weeks as an evaluation, but brightness has actually been surprisingly good. I really don't feel like I'm fighting sundown for image stability and just having a nice crisp edge to my lines. And that's, again, with something with a parallax fixed at 100 yards, and I'm looking at stuff at 100 yards when I'm assessing the glass quality. A little bit closer here, because I'm not parallaxed to 30 yards, the image is only slightly fuzzy, it's slightly out of touch, and that's because I'm on 5 power. If I go down to 3, it improves a little bit. If I go up higher, the image is going to seem a little bit fuzzier again. Let me just go do that once. Yep, 9 power, I wouldn't use it like that. But as soon as I hit even, let's see, about 7 power, it's pretty usable. 5 power is much more ideal. And I just feel comfortable using it on around 5 power though. The holdovers, basically the way I've been shooting on this Springer, with the holdovers, they're calculated to 5 power because that's what I zeroed on. And so I try to keep it right there. If I'm going to look down range and see what's moving around down there, target identification, looking at group size at further distances, then I can bump up the magnification, but then I move it back down to 5 power because, again, I just want to make it crystal clear. It's a second focal plane with no adjustable objective and a reticle that's meant for holdovers. So all that to say, I'm not going to be moving this around from 5 power. And I have to keep repeating that because I think a lot of people misunderstand and they're not very clear on how these optics work. You know, I was thinking about it, and maybe the way I explained things was a little too disorganized because I've been filming on multiple days. So I just want to take a second to be really clear about something. This Discovery optic is a second focal plane. Here's an example of a Discovery optic that's a first focal plane. The first focal plane, the subtensions work at any magnification. This happens to be a 4-20 over here. And the 4-20 is a first focal plane, which means that when I dial and all that, and when I look through the optic at 7 power or on 20 power, it doesn't matter. All of that is fine. As long as I adjust my parallax, the image will be relatively clear and I won't have focal plane issues. And you know, I do kind of need to keep my head in a similar spot here because of the eye boxes. Generally, more affordable optics have tougher eye boxes to work with. The 4-20 isn't bad. The 3-9 is acceptable for an eye box. But you have to remember that since this is a second focal plane optic, the reticle is only calibrated for 9 power. That's typically how it's going to be on any second focal plane with mil dots, is you need to shoot it on the full power. Typically that's for something like a 3-9 or something, you know, maybe up to 10 power or 12 power. That's typically how they're calibrated. If you have a second focal plane with a reticle that has a Christmas tree and it goes up to 25 power, it's probably not calibrated for 25 power. It's probably calibrated much lower than that, something like 10 or 12 power. This is calibrated at 9 power. And so what I've been doing by shooting at 5 power is I've basically made my own system here. It's not a true mils system because that designation and those particular specifications for data are only going to line up on 9 power. But because 9 power is not clear at 30 yards, I've dropped it down to 5 power to kind of make up my own system here. And so whatever you do, if you get one of these and you shoot it on an air gun, you are going to want to set up and record data. You're going to want to shoot at 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, 50 yards, 100 yards, and record your data on 1 power setting more than likely. Or maybe once you get to 100 yards, you flip it over to 9 power. You're going to have those rules set up for yourself. Most of us with something like this, it's not going to matter because you're shooting pop cans and squirrels. So I don't want to go into the weeds way too far with this, especially at the price point. I know most people are not going to take it that seriously, but the reason that I want to take a moment to explain that is, first of all, is I want to teach accurately. Number two, when I first started out in optics, this is the kind of stuff I definitely started with. And I advanced on to things like this. So here's 2 Discovery optics, different price points, second focal plane, first focal plane, 3-9, 4-20. So there's some differences here. And as I advanced on in optics, I did prefer first focal planes for certain kinds of shooting, but I still can appreciate a second focal plane. And here's where everything got started for me. With second focal plane optics, I made them work and they worked well for me. I enjoyed them, I shot them well, and I still shot tight groups. I still shot really, really far. And I see that this one being Springer rated, it's not gonna hold me back from transferring it over to a center fire where dialing is not gonna be an issue or something that I demand of the optic. And typically I can just hold over. This won't hold me back. And so I'm pretty happy with the optic. I just wanted to let everyone know the differences that you're gonna run into here, just considering that it's a second focal plane. It does have reticle and stadia in there, and those are not going to be calibrated true for you unless you kind of do what I did. And so you're gonna have to have your own system. I just want to throw that out there. Otherwise, if you're going for center fire, maybe save up a little bit more and go for a first focal plane. Discovery has a lot of first focal planes, and those will eliminate some of those issues for you, as well as add features like a side parallax, illumination, exposed turrets. Things like that might help you in that kind of shooting. But if you're just plinking or just deer hunting, or you're going to throw it on a Springer, I think you can make it work with this configuration right here. I'm going to make a slight correction just for today. Surprisingly, I find the corrections to be pretty tactile, clicky. I can hear them, I can feel them. And as I watch the reticle, it does appear to track and click consistently. So I'm surprised by that because these are not exposed turrets and they're not meant to be advertised as something you would track with, like an exposed turret. But it does seem to go right where I want it to go when I make those adjustments. All right, so I'm looking at 100 yards. I'm gonna go ahead and bump it up to 9 power just for a moment to talk about those colors and visually how the image looks. Mild distortion around the edges. It's not terrible. Picking up a little bit of, let's see, tiny bit of parallax error, but I am at 107 yards, not 100 exactly. Tiny bit of parallax error. I've got reds, browns, tans, blacks, greens, some blue. What else do I have down here? White, orange. So I've got some colors to look at. And so yes, I do have a little bit of a type of parallax error here. Yep, I can see that. A little distortion around the edges, a little distortion. It's more noticeable now on 9 power throughout the pane of the glass or the lens. There's a little distortion in there. At the price point, I expect it. Just so you know, I don't expect a perfect, like $4,000 piece of glass in something like this. I don't have unrealistic expectations in that way. I'm just trying to be honest about what I see. It's still above the price point for the quality of the color rendition, the contrast, and that mild parallax error. It's probably not going to amount to too much. Man, the flies are coming out. I'm going to go ahead and send one here. My data should be right around I think it's 4.3 at 107. Impact. So that's a pretty big target. I was shooting at a 10-inch target at 100, so not hard. But I could see my impact on a very small projectile, and I'm shooting against a target that is in a shadow, and it's a black colored target. So that should tell you something. The contrast there, I can still pick out the reticle against it. I can still see the projectile, because it's so slow, I can see it flying through the air, and I have enough quality of the image to tell when it marked the gray against the black. The things I think people are going to care about with an optic like this at this price point is going to be, is the color true enough? Is it good enough? Is the distortion too bad? No, distortion's not bad. Yes, the color is good enough. I think people are going to wonder a little bit about features, considering it is, it's shock proof, but it's a little bit more lined up for center fire stuff. Can you use it with an air gun? Well, I'm doing it with success, but I also have some knowledge there. I'm going to recommend that you do some research if you don't know about that, and you consider it's an impact. I want to stress that you consider looking into how second focal planes work with optics like this. And also, if you're going to throw it on that Springer, don't forget, you're going to want to zero it on a certain power and leave it there. If you're shooting closer, I recommend lower power. I think those people are going to be satisfied with this optic at the price point. Just getting a shock-proof optic that has a better image in general, it's really necessary, and I'm happy to see that there's something like this that kind of fulfills two roles. It can be your deer hunter optic. It could be a plinker for sure. The parallax is going to matter less and less the further you get from 100 yards. The distortion on the edges isn't going to be an issue because you're not going to be holding out past the 14 mils, 15 mils with this. Everything is still tight on here the way that it should be. I think you have an assist where things are extra tight, but it seems to be breaking in pretty nicely by now with the ocular or the magnification assist here. So I'm rambling a little bit. I just wanted to let you know, I do think it's worthwhile for what it is. And I'm making impacts on repeat at 100 yards. I'm pretty sure I could put pop cans down there and still plank with them with this and then throw it on a center fire and still do pretty good with that. So if you're looking for something that can kind of fulfill two roles, I can get behind this at the price point if you're not going to save up. But if you do save up, you could look into Discovery's other optics. They definitely have a 5 to 25, a 5 to 20 that are sitting on a bench right over there, and they work great, but they are not going to be something that's for springers. This is what you need if you're looking for a Springer rated optic that is not going to break the bank. As usual, if you liked the video, I appreciate it when people like, share, and subscribe. Maybe tell a friend about it if you got a friend who's looking for a very price efficient optic. If you yourself are, let me know down in the comments what you think of it when you get it. And also what kind of rifle you're going to throw it on, or pellet rifle you're going to throw it on. I like seeing follow-ups from subscribers and people who have actually tried the product out and just hear what they think about it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. See me in the next video. So just for fun, I wanted to mention, I don't know, was that 4 shots? I think it took me 4 shots. I just hit a clay pigeon at 210 yards using extreme holdovers. I had to use a reference point to do this one because I did not dial. But it's in there and it's a windy day. So I could both see the impact and also see where the corrections need to be made for windage and a little bit of elevation. I just had to pull the trigger and then aim down a little bit to see where it was actually falling into. So I'm pretty happy with that. That was cool.